Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time, it is a review of the 2008 horror film Parasomnia. Now, Parasomnia is a really odd film. It doesn't necessarily make the most sense. It has a very strange pace and feel to it. It's got its fair share of really surreal and weird visuals. The plot itself is very, let's just say, abnormal. It's a passion project for director William Malone, who wrote this film as well as directed it and was responsible for the majority of the film's funding. He came up with the concept and the screenplay while he was working on an episode of Masters of Horror called The Fair Haired Child. And this is a film that took a while to get made because he was working on getting the funds together and getting stuff in order to be able to do the movie. Now, this film is the first film that William Malone did after the financial and critical failure of Fear.com, at least the first feature film that he directed. And his direction in this isn't really a problem. Once again, William Malone has a great sense of style, definitely knows his way around a camera. Uh, there are some really great sequences in this that are very well done, especially a sequence in the film's climax involving a series of marionette kind of puppets. Really, what they are is they're automatons. So there's these automatons, and there's some really great stop motion effects, and the whole sequence is just expertly shot and really well done. And there are other sequences like that in the film. It's a weird movie in terms of its visuals, more ways than one, because there is a lot of camera work where the camera is at an angle or the camera is kind of moving around in ways that aren't necessarily the norm. And the film specifically has some really irritating, obnoxious editing. I don't know if it was William Malone's decision or it was the editors. I don't know. Whoever decided that it was a good idea to have the film feature these really jarring edits needed to take a step back and do something else, because the jarring edits make this film difficult to watch. And what I mean by jarring edits is there will be a lot of edits in this film where you will see a quick flash, like a camera bulb or a camera flash, and you will keep hearing sound effects that are associated with it. So it goes from one scene to another, and you see flash a light, and then you hear like a you hear these noises, these sound effects. It's just not even remotely necessary, and it doesn't really help the film in terms of its mood or atmosphere, and it definitely doesn't help when it comes to the viewer being engaged with the movie. So yeah, one of the worst things about the film for me is definitely the editing by Anthony Adler. It's just really obnoxious and totally, completely unnecessary in terms of its overly ambitious transitions. Now, the film, despite its flaws, does have an interesting idea. There are some really nice concepts in this film. I think William Malone had a good idea. I just felt that he needed a little bit more time to work on it, or maybe another perspective for the screenplay to really hone things. Because the idea of a character who is a parasomniac, and there's something involving her and this other villainous man who has these supernatural abilities of hypnosis and mind control. The idea that he's trying to get after her because she has this special innate ability that enables him to really become a part of her dreams and most of her life without her really having anything to say about it, because she's a parasomniac, creates a really solid dynamic. It also is an interesting approach to make to have this kind of character in this kind of film. This character who is only awake for a small amount of time for her life. So that idea in itself is really unique, and I really like that. I also felt that the way that the character of Byron Volpe is written is very uh, intriguing and interesting and captivating, and it's a character that could easily have been considered to be straight up silly, but the way that it's written, the character is actually scary. It's actually an intimidating character. In large part, it's definitely due to Patrick Kilpatrick's fantastic, just phenomenal performance in the role, but it's also a well written character. I wish the character was in the film more, and the film was more about him and his reign of terror and him terrorizing this poor girl with parasomnia than what it ultimately was about, which was more about this love story and then this whole thing going on with this character of Danny Sloan. The script is all over the place. It's honestly a mess, and it ties into the way that the film is edited, which I think is in part due to the script and how things are set up. It can be easily confusing and hard to follow. It starts out with a flashback. Well, not really a flashback. It starts out with a scene that's in the modern current time, and then it has all these flashbacks that are telling the story of how Danny Sloan met this parasomniac girl named Laura Baxter. And there's a little bit of a romance between the two that is genuinely sweet, but I feel that it kind of drags a little bit and honestly didn't need to be the main crux of the story. And her attempts to try to escape from not only this crazy psychopath in her dreams and Volpe, but also this potential future life as a lab rat, essentially in this mind uh, brain studies facility. They're planning on moving her into this facility from the hospital where she's staying at, and Danny gets involved and saves her and falls in love with her, but then he's in danger because Volpe is able to go into her dreams and also control her in some ways. So there's a scene where she loses it and goes after Danny after she's already killed somebody in his apartment complex because she was being used by Volpe to do his bidding. Because of her parasomnia, he's able to control her. And the reason why Volpe is doing this is because Volpe is himself a prisoner in a hospital, a mental hospital. He's in a padded cell. So this is his way of finding freedom, and ultimately he does by the end of the movie, and that leads to the climax where it's Volpe versus Danny, and that particular struggle. And Danny wants Laura because he has fallen in love with her, but Volpe wants her for himself because of how unique she is, and it leads to a final battle between the three of them, essentially. Now, that in itself isn't necessarily a bad plot. It's just too jumbled up. It's like a puzzle with all these puzzle pieces, but there's some pieces that don't actually fit, but they're just being shoved in there. And it's just a very jarring experience to sit down and watch this movie. On one hand, there's some really great visuals. There's some nice aspects of the film in other ways, like the performances by some of the cast members. In particular, I really thought Patrick Kilpatrick was fantastic as Byron Volpe, one of his best roles. That's why it's so frustrating and disappointing that the film itself is so below average and so infuriatingly confusing at times, because you have this great performance by Patrick Kilpatrick that is kind of wasted. Cherilyn Wilson, I thought, did an equally as good job as Laura Baxter, the Parasomniac. There's this certain childlike innocence about her character that I thought was handled really well, and it could have come across as laughable, but I thought her performance was authentic. I bought that she was this girl who had been asleep for most of her life. So when she, and on top of that, had been hospitalized, so she hadn't had much access to the outside world. So when she has this access to the outside world, thanks to Danny, I bought her childlike innocence, her almost toddler like enthusiasm for things like ice cream or the grass on the ground and so on and so forth. Jeffery Combs is also in this, playing a similar character to the detective that he played in Fear.com. It's always nice to see Jeffery Combs. I like this character. That's why I don't really like the ending. Once again, you gotta have him die. What is up with Jeffrey Combs playing detective characters in William Malone films where he dies? I guess it serves a point because the gunshot that that you hear in the film that comes from the gun that Jeffrey Combs' character uses to kill himself snaps Danny out of this trance that Patrick Kilpatrick's character is putting him in. But it's still too bad to see the two to see something happen to him. Alison Brie is also in this as Darcy, a little bit role. It's nice to see Alison Brie in an early role. She would go on to do a lot more stuff later on in her career. Timothy Bottoms is also in this as one of the doctors at the hospital. But the main cast is Dylan Purcell, Cherilyn Wilson, Patrick Kilpatrick, and a little bit of Jeffrey Combs, as well as this. Trying to find a. I don't know why they. Why don't. Sorry. I don't know why they don't have this guy listed on here, because he had a decent amount of screen time. He was the brother of the main character in this. I want to make sure. I think it might be Philip Newby as Phil. It might be who it is. But anyway, yeah, there's an character actor who plays Danny's younger brother. Now, speaking of Danny, Dylan Purcell's performance is very mediocre. It's really not that impressive. It's not horrible, but it's just nothing really that amazing or particularly noteworthy. I feel that the film would have been stronger too if the performance was better or if the character was just stronger and more interesting. Didn't have much of a personality. And I think that falls at the feet of William Malone when it comes to his screenplay. I also really thought the score was worth noting, by Nicholas Pike, and in particular this orchestral bit that I think was actually a piece from a classical composer that was used during the automaton sequence. I really loved that score, and I really loved the whole sequence in general. Very creative, very unique. And the film suffers from some really dated CGI. It's an example of the director trying to be a little bit too ambitious, and it happens during these dream sequences that occur quite frequently throughout the film, involving the Parasomniac character, Laura Baxter, where she's going around in this realm of mirrors, but they're all done with dated to the early late 2000s CGI, so it kind of takes you out of it. The film definitely does have some gore and blood, especially in the climax when Volp escapes. It's pretty bloody and pretty intense. And Volp's comeuppance is also quite bloody and gory. He gets his eyes poked out. His eyes are the source of his power, so it's fitting that's how he gets his demise. Is his eyes get poked out with I think it's like screwdrivers or knives or something. Um, but yeah, there's a lot of interesting, intriguing things in this. The ending is also really dark, but at the same time, it kind of fits because the character of Danny Sloan was going to be screwed anyway because of his connections with the girl and with all of this, and he was set up for murder. So, and he was already kind of dying anyway. So, the fact that he is comatose and he's living this constant repeated dream with the love of his life in suspended animation is honestly kind of poignant and heartfelt. It's dark, but it still has some genuine notes to it that, in my opinion, aren't really aren't really sour. So it's one of those things where it's a dark ending and it's downbeat, but it also has some hope. So it's one of those, and it's unquestionably unique as well. So it's one of those things where it kind of rubs off on me, but at the same time, it's not enough to make the overall film what I would call an average movie, let alone a good one. It's because there's so many elements of this plot that don't work. The pacing is too slow. The editing is really, really annoying. And you have all these characters, and some of them are genuinely strong, but the lead, not so much. And it's just one of those movies where it's got some interesting ideas, but they're not fully fleshed out, and it just leads to a very disappointing and frustrating experience. I would recommend Parasomnia if the idea interests you, if it sounds particularly intriguing, but if it doesn't, I would probably skip it because I feel that you're gonna really get quite frustrated at the film's logic, at the film's pacing, at the film's overall plot structure, which is just a mess. It might as well be a broken mirror. It's just all these pieces that are just jagged and don't quite go together and don't really provide the clearest vision, so to speak. But at the end of the day, I still want to give William Malone a lot of credit and kudos for going out there and making this movie because it's a passion project of his. It's something that he wanted to make. It's a concept that he felt was worth filming, and in some ways, it absolutely is. I just feel that the way that things are set up, this would have been a much better short film. I honestly think this film should have been a part of an anthology film by William Malone. I think he should have done this, and the concept that he had for the sequel to House on Haunted Hill, and had an anthology film in the vein of Dario Argento's Two Evil Eyes, but with William Malone's perspective and with his stories. I think the film would have been way stronger if it was a shorter film. It was like 30 minutes long, 30, 40 minutes or something, and it's a part of an anthology film. The pacing would have been stronger. Then you would have had more, just really just have the stuff with Volpe for the most part. A little bit of the romance, but not a whole lot. Cut out some of the just jagged, weird edits, and just create a much more satisfying experience. Because as it is, it's just not nearly as satisfying as it could have been, and that's what's just so frustrating about films like this. Because there's potential, and it's just wasted with the 108-minute running time. It did not need to be that long. There wasn't enough there. There wasn't enough meat on the bone to make this a full meal. So it should have just been an appetizer. That's just how I personally feel about it. But anyway, I don't really know what else to say about Parasomnia, except thank you for watching my review. And as always, I'll see you later. See ya.